I think the entire industry views Coinbase with so much like admiration and respect for everything that they've done for it. But you do have like, a member of the executive team that openly really competes with Solana. And so that creates, I don't know if you want to call it healthy or unhealthy, but it does create tension. And I think, from, our point of view, or, it's not our job to, necessarily have preferential treatment for one reason or another, but to just, invest time and resources in projects that we believe are important for the world. And I think Solana was one of those projects that was really underserved historically and was a place where we felt like we can provide like really important value.
Today's episode is brought to you by Stacks. Bitcoin's $1 trillion potential is untapped. Stacks unlocks it. Convert BTC to SBTC and earn up to 5% APY in Bitcoin. No custodians, just trustless DeFi. Your Bitcoin working harder. Bet on Bitcoin's future now. Armani Ferrante, the CEO and co-founder of Backpack. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
It's really an exciting time right now. I think there's so much to get into with you. We can talk about what you're trying to do with kind of FTX EU, and we can talk about just in general your background, what you learned watching, as we all did, the FTX collapse, and what that has inspired you to do with Backpack. Why don't we just start, for those who don't know you, Armani, your background, how you got to be where you are building Backpack.
Sure, yeah. I guess maybe to start from the beginning. So, I got out of university, started my corporate job at Apple about during the 2017 bull cycle. I guess the price kept going up. There were some folks trading in the office. And it wasn't really until I read the Ethereum white paper. I was like sitting in a Phil's Coffee in San Francisco on Market Street. And that was really the thing that nerd sniped me. And the whole concept of a global world computer that nobody controlled, but that everybody operated was the coolest thing, I think, just like ever. Yeah. And so I was part of that, like 2017, I think, contingent of engineers that just wanted to work on this stuff. And so just left my corporate job and jumped into crypto headfirst with basically no plan other than I just wanted to work on open source and work on this cool stuff. Purely by an accident of history, I ended up at Alameda for about 3 months. This is prior to FTX, working on the trading systems there. It was short-lived. I ultimately wanted to work on Ethereum, but I basically spent those from like 2017, 2018, all the way to 2020 working on a bunch of just Ethereum open source and some various other L1s. Fast forwarding to 2020, I get involved with Solana, and I guess the rest is history. I worked on a bunch of DeFi stuff, wallet infrastructure, a lot of developer tooling, and then fast forwarding to today. There's really three parts of our business now. There's obviously the spot and derivatives international exchange. There's the wallet. And then there is the maybe most counterintuitive part of the business, which is the NFT project, Mad Lads.
Yes.
I won't go down that rabbit hole, but a group of 10,000 pieces of art and a bunch of rambunctious and honestly an inspiring group of people all around the world.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to put all the pieces together because I think, I was looking back on one of our interviews with Anatoly, and he mentioned the Mad Lads launch, that NFT launch, as kind of like the rallying point for people in Solana around the FTX collapse when so much negativity was being spread, confusion.
For whatever reason, it seems like the fight or flight instinct kicked in to a lot of projects, and a lot of founders will always usually pick fight over flight. And a lot of folks doubled down and built products that had like really outside successes. Like in my mind, like the whole Solana ecosystem shifted after the Mad Lads launch.
And that's obviously like huge praise coming from him as the co-founder of Solana. But I want to dig into, I guess, to maybe some of that learning around the FTX collapse. And, we don't need to go too deep into it. History is history.
Sure.
But in terms of you guys infamously or famously having $14 million-ish like locked up in FTX, I think back to even me as a founder. That was a crazy time.
Yeah.
For you having that much money like locked up, what was that like to be like, okay, we're here to do something different, and these are like the learnings that everyone in the space had?
Yeah. So for context, that was 88% of our cash on hand. Like for all intents and purposes, the company was dead. There was no good reason to continue onward.
Yeah.
I think it was not my first reaction to start an exchange. I'm not a crazy person. I know just how challenging it was. Our first kind of instinct was just, okay, make the decision. Are you actually going to keep going, or are you going to shut this thing down and move on? I think at the time, everybody thought Solana was more or less dead. There's a ton of confusion, a ton of misinformation, to be honest. Maybe one of the biggest, most, I guess, insightful lessons is just how much the world's interpretation of events can diverge from the underlying reality. I was in a pretty, I think, unique position where the reason why I originally even looked at Solana and got into it was because of FTX. I was in this like really, I think, unique position where I was kind of like in the middle of both worlds, where I worked basically exclusively like on the Solana ecosystem, but I was, hired by Alameda to do that, right? And so, I think I was able to like really see the way the world reacted to the collapse, particularly through the lens of somebody in the Solana ecosystem, and just see how much price and sentiment diverged from reality and fundamentals. And I think at the time, there was just such a strong and genuinely just passionate group of people that were building on the network that I think for me and for many others, we all very clearly knew it was not going anywhere. And if that crypto was going to exist, a world computer was going to exist. And if a world computer was going to exist, it was going to be built a lot like Solana. And in fact, Solana was really like the only one that had any kind of a chance at the time of hitting escape velocity. And I think just, come for the tech, stay for the vibes is the one liner I think that a lot of people like to point to. And I think that was really true. You were talking about Anatoly and him, but certainly like he is somebody that it's no coincidence that like him and Vitalik and like some of these other like leaders in crypto are just people that I think a lot of builders just really admire and want to work with and rally behind. And it was a crucible moment. And I think me and many others just weren't going anywhere.
Well, I want to get into Anatoly's takes on meme coins in a sec, because he kind of like opened my mind to looking at them a bit differently than kind of some of, to your point, the sensationalist headlines have kind of like cast them in the garbage can. But they've proven something, and I want to get into that in a second. But before we do, the idea of Backpack and what it's trying to do, kind of with that, I think, Solana mentality in mind, versus, it's interesting because there is this kind of pushback right now, I think, from like Mert and other people in the Solana ecosystem basically calling out Coinbase and their kind of like stiff arm, if you will, to the Solana ecosystem, since they're so levered to Base and what they're building there. I'm curious to get your take in terms of like building an exchange with a preference maybe towards one chain. Is it fair to say that that's even what Backpack might ever do? Coming from the Solana ecosystem, as you said, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things that are simultaneously true. So the first thing is that I think as an exchange business, just purely from a strategic standpoint, like you want to be, neutral. It's your job to build a really great product for your users. And the way that you build a really great product for your users is to support, on and off ramping from every chain possible, and to provide all the markets possible, and to provide, access to kind of the entire on-chain economy. I think what you're referencing is an admitted frustration from really the entire Solana community towards the institutional, I guess, Coinbase bias. I think that's fair to say. I think the entire industry views Coinbase with so much like admiration and respect for everything that they've done for it. But you do have like, a member of the executive team that openly really competes with Solana. And so that creates, I don't know if you want to call it healthy or unhealthy, but it does create tension. So I think that on the one hand is true. I think through the Backpack point of view, we felt like, well, at least, especially when we started the exchange, no major centralized exchange was supporting Solana. You really had every major founder, maybe not every major founder, many major founders like openly either criticizing or questioning the value and the existence of Solana or whatever. And I think, from, our point of view, where, it's not our job to, necessarily have preferential treatment for one reason or another, but to just, invest time and resources in projects that we believe are important for the world. And I think Solana was one of those projects that was really underserved historically, and was a place where we felt like we can provide like really important value, especially given, I think, our, standing and just historically speaking in the ecosystem.
Well, I do wonder, because I mean, like, when you think about what you would need to show, right? Like, and this is something that we hear every time we talk with Solana builders, is the idea of kind of that unifying call of what is it? You can correct me because I'm going to butcher it, but it's like markets at the speed of light.
Yeah. NASDAQ at the speed of light. Or
there
whatever.
You go. Okay. Yeah. So there, like, that is a unifying call for people building in the ecosystem. And I feel like, you can't really show that unless you have something to show. And so correct me if I'm wrong again, but I feel like the meme coin boom kind of came from, well, we need to show that this is like how it'll work. And they're meme coins now, but it could be stocks in a year, 2 years, 3 years. And so, like, what do you make of kind of that boom with meme coins and kind of some of the blowback in terms of, sure, you can have a fair launch, but some of these things have gotten increasingly pretty ugly in terms of what it's done for the space. But then also kind of interesting to see, to your point, Base and Clanker and all these other things that are kind of coming up look like they're kind of repeating the same thing. So, I mean, what do you make of kind of meme coins, the idea of that versus, I guess, what we're both in, which is more NFT side of things?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, again, there's a couple things that are simultaneously true. Firstly, I don't think anybody's happy with all of the recent craziness around meme coins. Like, let's just call it what it is, like the pump and dumps, right? All the speculation and nefarious activity around, I think, some of these more recent launches. I don't think anybody's happy with that. With that said, I think it's important to like give some context on exactly what's happening, both from the perspective of like why we're all here, but also through the historical lens of like maybe what gave rise to these meme coins. So, I mean, as you said, like Solana and a lot of these systems are purpose-built financial technology. Solana is literally NASDAQ at the speed of light. That is Anatoly's vision, internet capital markets. And let's take, all of TradFi, put it on chain and build this, fair, credibly neutral, censorship resistant, a foundational layer for finance that we can all transact upon. And that is kind of, ultimately like what we're building. And I think DeFi and wallets and exchanges, these are all things that are contributing to that vision. And this is really the bleeding edge of modern distributed systems, right? This has never really been built before. In fact, Solana itself is on probably the bleeding edge of the bleeding edge, where it has to solve a lot of these really hard engineering challenges in order to actually get this system to the scale to where it can actually handle like a global workload that's meaningful that the world can actually run on. So I think that's like foundationally true. Now, if you put this technology in the context of what's been happening in the world, namely in the crypto world over the past, couple of years, maybe before the election, what you have is a bunch of really talented builders that really had a straitjacket on, with no regulatory clarity, that were, for all intents and purposes, many folks were just scared and had no idea like what was going to happen. There's the public perception of crypto and this whole like anti-crypto army thing. There was, all of this, like, all these enforcement actions. You didn't know if you could tell your like friends and family that you even worked in crypto because they would think you're a crazy person. And so that gave rise to, I think, this like financial nihilism meme, where I think, a lot of people got really frustrated with the space, and a lot of people, thought, okay, well, if I can't build real things here because like the world won't let me build real things, what happens if you build, I guess, more ridiculous things, which, I guess some of it came from genuine builders. I think a lot of it came from just maybe people with higher risk tolerance that maybe weren't like, genuine builders. I think that's fair to say. And so you had this like irony where the negative sentiment and like the negative actions taken by the world against crypto, led to, at least in part, I don't want to maybe rid the industry of agency altogether, but in part that contributed to, I think, some of the, I don't know, pernicious emergent behavior that happened, and that manifested in the form of meme coins. And I think that's the uncharitable interpretation. At the same time, I think there's also the charitable interpretation, which is also true, which is, that famous, I think it was Chris Dixon line, which is that the next big thing starts looking out like a toy. And if, Solana and these public permissionless blockchains are, internet native capital markets, then meme coins are the toy for that. And, very quickly we end up in a world where, okay, you do the load test with meme coins, but now we can, start talking about all the world's value once that works. We can start talking about equities, stocks, bonds, whatever it is.
It gets a lot more interesting when you tie, sort of real upside to it. And it's not just a meme coin anymore, not to, bash meme coins, but the idea of, if you had some real value or ownership, and I was just speaking at ETH Denver about this, kind of our model in the idea of us being the first NFT project, Coinage being the first NFT project to pay distribution back to NFT holders in the US, like that starts to look very interesting. And so I don't know what that evolution looks like, but to tie it back to Backpack, where do you see your guys, where do you see yourselves fitting into that? Because how far along are we? How far is your roadmap in terms of getting there? And what excites you about kind of where you're at now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's a couple layers to this. So at the foundational layer is censorship resistance, right? This is a credibly neutral, decentralized, permissionless blockchain, right? Solana is maybe one of the closest to this, although there are many other like great L1s that are currently building right now. And I think that is the starting point. The metaphor I like to use for people is like, the ocean, right? Like a blockchain is kind of like a data ocean. You might ask the question like, okay, why, like what are properties of the ocean that make it like a good medium to transact? You can imagine like the US sending like shipping containers to Japan or Taiwan or pick your favorite, country in Asia. That works because the US doesn't think that China controls the Pacific Ocean. If it did, it would not be sending shipping containers, maybe with, valuable goods or whatever, across the ocean, right? And likewise, China would not be using the Pacific Ocean if it thought that the US can come and capture its ships at any point in time. It's a credibly neutral medium. And this is what allows kind of the entire world to, coordinate, using, that metaphor crudely. Blockchains are just data oceans. They're credibly neutral mediums that it doesn't matter what country you are, it doesn't matter what religion you are, it doesn't matter what politics you are. We can all come together and transact and coordinate in a way that we never would have before because we could all trust the system. And you could trust it not because I'm a good person, not because you have the same values of me. You can trust it by virtue of the construction of the math, if you want to put it in those terms or whatever. And so that's the most important foundational layer. It's all about censorship resistance. On the other side of the spectrum, you have maybe the opposite of censorship resistance. You have compliance, right? So a system that is censorable by design. You have to obey and abide by the laws of whatever region that you're serving users in, right? And this is, the world of modern finance, right? There's an enormous backlog of a century of regulation in modern finance. I think a lot of crypto people like to, stand in stark contrast to that, but it's also important that if you're a crypto person to understand why those things exist, right? We've learned a lot of lessons since like, the 1920s or the 1930s or whatever of how to build like really deep liquid capital markets, right? The US capital markets are the most trusted capital markets in the world. It turns out that's a pretty good outcome. Like, I think most people agree that like modern finance is an incredible, like, it sounds ridiculous to say, especially sitting here in New York, but it is incredible, right? And it is like a large part of what led to the world that we live in today. And I think that is like the contribution that we're trying to bring into crypto. It's like the exchange sits in this really unique position where it sits on top of this like global crypto economy, where it is ultimately a bridge from traditional finance into crypto, where we go out and we solve all of the hard problems that modern financial institutions have to solve and that most crypto companies don't solve, because most crypto companies are thinking in terms of these credibly neutral layers. And so you can think of us very much in terms of like a crypto native financial institution, in the same way that like Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook were these like internet native companies that grew out of, I think the early 2000s.
Yeah. I mean, specifically then, in terms of how Backpack's trying to do things differently and kind of what we saw, again, to look back years now removed from the FTX collapse, I think when Can Sun came by to talk about how Backpack is built differently, the idea of never repeating again some of the shenanigans that, to be fair, not even just FTX. I think a lot of other exchanges copied some of those elements in terms of, hey, we should have our own token. Our own token can kind of be used on the exchange.
Right.
That kind of got called out after the collapse, which again, more people than just FTX were doing that. And so, speak to, I guess, the points in terms of solving those problems when it comes to an exchange that would, as you guys have, I think, pioneer the idea of showing some of this on chain.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a super complex topic, but happy to dive deep into this. So I think firstly, your point that what other exchanges are doing, it is maybe important to call out that a lot of the exchanges, even today, still have a lot of the same things going on, right? They all have internal market makers. Like literally every single big exchange, other than maybe a handful, has their own Alameda. Today, trading against users today. This is not like some type of like, this isn't speculation. Everybody knows this. And so I think that's like maybe one of the like more interesting idiosyncrasies. The token thing, I think tokens are great. I have no problem with it. I think what you're referencing is using it as collateral and using that as margin in a margin system. A lot of people have that more or less today still. But I think there's a couple aspects to the FTX problem, and there's not a single answer to solve it. You kind of have to triangulate the answer across many different points in the design space that address different parts of the puzzle. So the foundational issue, or the most impactful part of the problem, I think, is just the infrastructure. So a lot of people look at FTX as an example of the perils of crypto. It's exactly the exact opposite. FTX is an example of the perils of traditional finance. In fact, this is not specific to crypto at all. We've seen financial collapses happen in this form for the past century. It's not specific to crypto or FTX in any meaningful way. Yes, what happened there was terrible, but also a lot of other terrible things have happened in finance. And it's not a crypto thing. So like that has to be like super clear. In fact, crypto, blockchain technology, all of this is purpose built literally to solve this problem. And FTX was not built in a way that embraced all of the technological innovation that has been happening in crypto, right? It was famous for taking shortcuts and being super fast and not solving the hard engineering challenges. So I think foundationally is imbuing into the exchange or whatever product that you're building trust minimization as a first order technical property, like down to the code. And I think that's the first thing, right? And that's really what makes blockchains and crypto and things like Solana so special, is that you can actually verify like the computational integrity of the ledger at any given point in time, more or less indisputably, right? Every state transition, every order placement, every deposit, every withdrawal, every liquidation, every cancel, you name it, you can prove it with the math. And so that's the first order thing. So on our exchange, very similar, we don't call it a blockchain, but very similar to a blockchain, right? Every state transition is signed with a cryptographic key pair. You can always look at any snapshot of the ledger and you can look at every state transition and see, oh, Armani actually did sign off on this. This was actually the binary that ran this code. And I can actually verify bit for bit, byte for byte, transition for transition, exactly what happened. And there's no question that we can't answer with the core kind of exchange ledger. And so I think that is the foundational thing. And that's like maybe its own deep technical topic, but there's a bunch of techniques that lead to this, right? Everything from the basic distributed system techniques like state machine replication to multi-party computation to I think proof of reserves is the other thing people are just generally like really I think passionate about post FTX, like you should be able to verify that the funds are there physically in wallet sitting on chain in a trust minimized way where I don't have to say like, trust me, bro, just like go run the math yourself. You can run it on your own machine. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. You just need a terminal, an internet connection, and a validator, and you can check it.
I think one good example of that, by the way, would be what just happened with Bybit, and like the idea of, you know, a hack, $1.4 billion goes out the door. Everyone's freaking out. And you had what I think, I don't know, I'd be curious to get your take, but I think it set like a new standard in terms of responding to something, right? And I think back to Terra and the idea of, hey, you know, steady lads, like the idea of what happened there and people being caught in like, oh shit, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And Bybit like spun up a live stream in like, I want to say like 3 hours to kind of fully address everything. I mean, that seems like it could have been way worse.
Yeah.
And they tried, by the way, I think, in terms of showing proof of reserves for like, yes, that's gone, but here's how we're doing otherwise. And I don't know if there was a learning for you in watching that all play out, but it seemed like almost like a better example to point to for a lot of people in the space for like how you respond to these things.
Well, in terms of crisis response, like that was just, I guess, a lesson for everybody. Like really, like the entire team over there just did an amazing job. Like, you know, I wouldn't say I'm particularly like knowledgeable about like the internal workings of Bybit or what's going on over there, so I wouldn't really be able to comment on that. But I think what you're pointing to or what you're touching on is also segues into another important topic, which is that like the operational procedures of exchanges matter as much as the underlying engineering infrastructure. Like you could have the perfect exchange architecture, but if your custody processes are not, you know, secure and sound, then you can run into other types of issues, which is what Bybit ran into.
Or like even like, I don't know, you could even use a normal bank like Silicon Valley Bank, and the idea of just having like a bank run or like people panicking. Like you could have perfectly sound technology and infrastructure, but your customers might be like, I don't trust that this is going to be around anymore.
Right. I mean, I think the big difference between Silicon Valley Bank and crypto exchanges is that for a sound crypto exchange, there's no concept of a bank run because it's one-to-one backed. If there's a bank run, i.e. if there's a flood of people exiting, that should be fine. And if it's not fine, then something's wrong, right? With Silicon Valley Bank, it's different because they're fractional reserves, right? They take the money, they go invest it. And with Silicon Valley Bank, they invested it, you know, poorly due to, you know, interest rate, you know, duration mismatches or whatever. So it's a bit subtly different, but
it is. I mean, I guess my broader point though is that like you said, shortcuts versus building for the long term and doing it well establishes a base of trust that I think is distinguished and different if that's the path that Backpack's trying to go down. And like then the question becomes, how do you intend to leverage that? What's the plan for expansion now to build that out? And I know, you know, we opened with kind of talking about FTX EU and what you're trying to do there, but talk to me about kind of what the strategy is to continue growing and like where you see the biggest potential, I guess.
Yeah. So I think what makes crypto special is kind of what I was saying earlier, which is the global capital formation. It's not just US capital markets, it's internet capital markets, right? You can bring the US dollar anywhere with, you know, the USDC stablecoin, and generalizing that concept to not just be, you know, to bring, you know, dollars around the world, but to bring all of capital markets on chain, I think it is really the ultimate end game. And so I think, you know, we are very much looking and pushing towards a future where you can trade any type of digital asset, you know, whether it's a stock, a bond, not just crypto native assets, but any assets. And this whole like, you know, distinction between DeFi and CeFi is important. And that's like maybe an engineering discussion, but to the rest of the world, it's just finance. And to me, and I think to many others, it's very much like the next very obvious kind of progression of capital markets. And, you know, where Backpack is heading and really focusing on is really, getting distribution and focusing internationally, because I think that is what makes these markets really special. It's that international like network effect where I could have U.S. products, U.S. people, but I could also have folks in Europe. I could have folks in Hong Kong. I could have folks in China. I could have folks in Africa. It doesn't, South America. It doesn't matter where you are.
Yeah.
You can all kind of come together and transact together. And I think, Backpack is maybe interesting in the sense that we're an American company. I lived in Chicago for a bit. I grew up in California. But we are, I live in Tokyo currently, and we're really focused on Asia. And, we spent, some time in Dubai, and now we're focusing on Europe. And so, really the story of Backpack has been, building up infrastructure in, every part of the world, so that we can, bring people on chain and really kind of contribute to this like larger industrial vision of internet capital markets.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, that's when things work the best too, is when you're connecting those different locations. And I kind of think back to kind of where Sam's story even started, in the idea of kind of the arbitrage trade of kind of traveling to move Bitcoin across borders, and how big that opportunity was when it was early. And I think, again, back to like kind of speed running all of these things, because Do's vision as well was kind of similar to tokenizing everything, starting with a stablecoin, an algo stablecoin that didn't work out, but the vision of bringing everything on chain, like equities on chain and everything else. We were just down in El Salvador talking to Paolo about what kind of they're doing there. Bitfinex moving their headquarters to El Salvador too, and now working on tokenizing treasuries. Like, it all gets very interesting. But I wonder if there's a large opportunity just in terms of like the real usability and need for a stable coin is mostly outside the US. And so like a lot of this becomes interesting in terms of there are some opportunities that are larger outside the US, just exporting dollars. But then, to your point, maybe there's more opportunities in terms of being out in Asia and, having a large user base here. So how does kind of Backpack look at that geographically in terms of where you want to be? What's most exciting to you now? And maybe the next step. What should we expect next from Armani?
Yeah. No, I think you nailed it. I think from first principles, you have to ask yourself the question, why is this better? Like, what is the genuine upgrade to the world? And then how do you achieve that? Right. And I think there's maybe two very obvious things. The first very obvious thing is simply error minimization, right? This is, I guess people frame this in the context of trust minimization, but it's really all about how do I minimize the probability or the expected number of mistakes in the system, right? And that might be minimizing fraud, that might be minimizing human error, that might be maximizing compliance and adherence to whatever local rules and laws that exist in a given region. But that's the first like really important property that these systems get you that is indisputably good for the world. Bring trust minimization compute to the world, and the world is better. And so I think that's like the first lens to view the problem through. The second lens is, I think, a consequence of that, which is liquidity and depth and the ability to bring together all of these different parties that otherwise wouldn't be working together, and to bring them all together to create this like amazing network effect of and through the exchange lens, like a sides of makers and takers, through like the token issuance lens, the ability to formulate capital to raise money for companies or whatever.
Yeah.
But that global coordination is the other like really important thing that only happens when you can bring the world together and not just a single country.
Yeah.
And so when you're thinking about what's next for Backpack, or how do we orient ourselves, and what problems are we trying to solve, and why do we exist in the first place, it's really through the lens of these two just genuine step function improvements of the world. And so I think where I view myself personally as somebody that's trying to this might sound a little corny or whatever, but bring the world together in the sense that let's go out and solve all of the hard problems, to do fiat on and off ramping around the world, to do compliance around the world, to get to know our users and build communities all around the world, and bring everybody together to be able to create this global hub of like money and commerce in a way that really never was able to exist prior to the advent of some of these modern cryptographic techniques and blockchain technology. And that's, I think, ultimately why we are so focused, not just in the US, but also internationally, because it's that global presence that allows us to upgrade financial markets in a way that really has never been done before.
Yeah, and you can't just do that in one market. So the larger kind of the way that you're able to build it, the way that you guys have, I don't know, it's very exciting, and congrats again on everything that you've done so far. And thank you again for coming out here, Armani Ferrante, co-founder of Backpack. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
That was great.
Yeah, likewise.
Thanks, man.